Welcome to Downward Dogma, a podcast that explores and challenges today's authority system. Join us as we discuss the ingredients and functionality of our current framework and explore some possible solutions. Prepare to have your awareness of today's political terrain expanded. And now, your hostesses, Jennie, Tasha, and Sarah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Downward Dogma. Tasha is on sabbatical, so you're here with myself, Jennie McDaniel, and we have Sarah Murphy. Sarah, how you doing?
Good. I'm doing well this cold Wednesday. I'm in Nashville, and I'm in a sweater. It's not typically this chilly.
You got a cold front. I was just working with my Canadian friend, and she goes, it is cold here. And she goes, it's not just because we're Canada, because she's right across the river from Detroit. She goes, we got a cold front or something, so you might be getting some of that too. We've had a little bit of coolness in the air as well, but it's still a lovely sunshiny day here in, I guess I'm just north of Albuquerque. So glad that you're at least not getting tornadoes and that it's just a little bit cold.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And today we are going to talk about the future of business. And I think that maybe we'll start with what will that look like going forward. And I'm really interested in that article you read about sanitation. Do you want to start us off with that and look at that first?
Yeah, it was actually a much larger article that talked about a whole bunch of things. It was really fascinating, and I'll have to dig it up and see if we can include it in the show notes. But one of the things that really kind of caught my eye was the data that they pulled from a couple instances that someone had gone in and done a great amount of investigation of. And the first one, they looked at the scenario where one individual went to dinner with like 6 of their friends, and this was before everything got shut down. And the study looked at the people who were infected from that experience and the conclusions that were drawn. And interestingly, a couple factors that come into play, and there's math behind all of this, and I'm not going to go into it because that's not my strength, but basically you're looking at a few factors as to like how likely you are going to get exposed or infected. And one of the things is length of time that you spend in someone else's airstream, basically. So, you know, one example is if I'm jogging down the road and I pass another jogger, which I do like every night, and it's funny now because the jogging community is all like, you know, it used to be that you just needed enough space to get by, but now it's like, okay, I'm going to go on this side of the car and you go on the other side of the car, and it's all like unspoken, but people are just naturally shifting.
Good.
And the science behind that is that when you're jogging by someone, even though they're breathing heavier than they normally would, you spend so little time in that person's airstream that your chance of being contaminated is very, very low. But when you're sitting down at a restaurant and you're having dinner with somebody for an hour and a half, then you're literally spending all of that time breathing that same air. And so of the table, most of them got infected, and then it didn't stop there. Nearby tables, even those that were further than 6 feet away, also got infected because of air circulation in the restaurant. They had air conditioners on, they have people walking by in the same kind of general direction, and that carries all of those droplets that get expelled while you're breathing and talking, sneezing and coughing.
Interesting. You know, my mind goes to when I would hang out with my ex-husband in some cigar lounges. Some of them were in Nashville, some of them were in Chattanooga, and they had an excellent filtration system. I wonder if we're going to have to invest into the future with protection in that way, where it filters the air and maybe kills contaminants or refreshes it and kills anything in the air, because that will be a problem in airplanes, airports, restaurants. It's fascinating to look at and to see what we'll need to do. Do the tables need to be further than 6 feet apart so there is no contamination? I wonder, because this isn't my strong point of knowing gadgets and devices that already exist, but I wonder if there's something that they can connect to the public buildings that will help sanitize the air. Do you think there's anything like that?
Well, I do think certainly air filtration systems in closed environments like airplanes is a really good idea. I mean, hospitals, they probably already have some level of that anyways. Now, whether they need to be upgraded or, maintained more, better filters, I can't really speak to. But what I would like to go back and touch on is that interesting thought that you kind of put forth about restaurants and their having tables more than 6 feet apart. I don't know when the last time was that you had a meal in a restaurant in New York City, but it's always I'm from New York originally, and so it's always been kind of this inside joke where if you go out to dinner or, to eat in New York City, chances are you're going to be practically sitting in the person's lap that is at the table next to you. Space is obviously limited, but more so, and this is what I think people don't recognize, we're kind of phasing the rollout of restaurants right now, and so they're only allowed to, at least in Nashville, I can't speak for everyone, 50% capacity, and they have to have their tables or the chairs at least 6 feet from everybody. Restaurants survive, one, not all that often, but two, if they do survive, it's on razor-thin margins as it is. When I was the executive director of profitability for a $25 million restaurant company in Washington, D.C., we had 5 locations. And the goal for those locations, if we were doing well, was 5% profit, which means for every dollar that the restaurant made, 5% could go towards organic growth, raises, like opening up new locations. It's just, there's already no margin of error. And that is a well-run restaurant who use data and, all sorts of measures to control costs. So most restaurants don't have that kind of setup. They don't have a director of profitability in most cases. And they certainly don't have wiggle room to operate at 50% capacity, much less or much more, whatever, if you're asking them now to install these expensive HEPA filters and all sorts of other measures in order to ensure that the air people are breathing is, safer than it was originally.
It reminds me of Nancy Pelosi was on, of course, the television, not only most days, but definitely this time that I'm thinking of a couple months ago, and it was right at the beginning of the coronavirus, and she was saying it's wildly optimistic to start a business to begin with, let alone with these measures that are going to be impacting. Like you said, restaurants were just barely making it before with a very small profit margin. How are they going to run at 30% mass or even half or what have you? They can't. So what does this mean for the future of business? It's a debate and philosophy conversation we'll be having, because I think we can see some things, but I don't know if we know it all. But it's interesting because when I ran a business, brick and mortar, I was in Michigan, and it was called the Holistic House, and I was doing massages morning till night, and so were 2 other girls, and we were just living normal lifestyles. Sure, we had a nice used car, and there was an apartment in a safe area, and we ate food, but no one was going to Europe and doing all these absorbent things. So I can't even imagine trying to keep a brick and mortar going with a fraction of the income. It's just physically impossible. The numbers don't add up. Not an economist, not an accountant, but certainly I'm competent enough to see that those numbers can't sustain themselves. So what do you think this is going to look like in your mind's eye, Sarah, when you think about it? What do you think is going to happen in brick and mortar, for example?
I think a couple things. I think everything is going to get more expensive because we're no longer just paying for the luxury of having someone else cook our food for us, but we're paying for the luxury of having someone else cook our food for us and then eating it in a location that's not our dining room. Mm-hmm. It's going to be considered a luxury to get a table at one of these otherwise normal restaurants because they'll have to be spaced out a little bit further. I've seen some that are like hanging shower curtains around each of the tables to provide a little bit of barrier from airflow. It's coupled with an increasing food cost when it comes to meat, specifically right now chicken and beef, I think, are having issues in their meat packing process, right? So if you know anything about our food system, you have the producer who is growing cows, raising chickens, and then it gets sent off to a processing plant where they kill it, they break it down into smaller pieces, then they send it to a distributor, and then that distributor supplies it to restaurants, schools, hospitals, grocery stores, and from there. So it's like a 4-part system, and what we're seeing is shortages and increased prices in the grocery stores, but that's not because we don't have enough cows and chickens. It's because the packing plants can't break it down into the format we eat. So what we're seeing is an increase in prices, which obviously is going to trickle down into an increase of restaurant food and food, that you'll get at the grocery store.
This is taking us back into the olden days where only very wealthy people went out to eat, or if you did go out to eat, it was a very special occasion that you were celebrating. A lot less quantity, and it's going to end up being a lot more expensive, like you said. So hence we're not going to be able to grab a sandwich just willy-nilly like we might be able to for $6-7 before. Now it's going to be a $15 sandwich, and a very basic sandwich, which is going to be out of reach for a lot of people. So it looks like America might have to cut back on their convenience eating, which I don't think is necessarily a bad idea.
Well, certainly right now, we're all kind of sitting at home, right? So it makes it a little bit more available for us to be cooking these meals because we're not spending hours, commuting and dropping off kids at school and all of that. But some of that is going to return. Some of that is going to be required. My daycare just called me yesterday and asked if we were ready to send our youngest back as of the end of the month. And my first inclination was like, yes, absolutely, get her out of here. I love her, I do, but I am also a working professional.
And a little space for yourself, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was walking. We did a morning family walk today just to get people out of the house. And, I was talking to my husband. We were trying, but the kids were talking over us in most cases. And, I literally said, it is impossible to be a working professional and a stay-at-home mom at the same time. There may be some killer individuals out there who can do it all. I'm just not one of them. And so if I am one of them, there are lots and lots of other people out there who don't feel like they can get anything done professionally if they're also having to raise their children. And so what we might start to see is this great divide. There's already a huge lack of child care options in most urban areas, and certainly affordable child care options. We might see kind of a micro community of parents who co-educate children. So maybe this mom homeschools the kids on Monday and Wednesday, and this dad does it on Tuesday and Thursday, and that way people can actually get work done at home, but also have their kids looked after in a way that isn't just setting them in front of screens for long periods of time.
It's brilliant. I love that. I was just reading somebody's meme the other day, and it was really funny. And it said, oh, my mom is sending me emails telling me about how the neighborhood has paired together and is in a co-op, and they'll take turns homeschooling, right? Kind of like you said, maybe one day one parent does it, then I don't know how they split it up, but any which way. The whole meme was basically about an ex-military guy was in charge of PE, and he had the kids in the backyard chanting, how they're like, I don't know, I've been told, like that kind of stuff. having them chant funny things and marching around and stuff for PE. And I'm like, that is great. Even if it's not exactly what they'd be learning in PE in a typical school, you have a man who's interested in helping the kids